Hey everybody, Tony Cottospotty here, and I wanted to talk today about, of course, what else, the election, but I want to talk about it in a different light, a very serious light, actually, because I have entitled this, Why the Only Legitimate Election Result is a Trump Win. I know that sounds a little ridiculous, but it's really not, I know it sounds odd, but I hope you'll remain patient and hear me out. You know, we're in a very precarious situation in this country right now. And I want to just step back and examine the political landscape right now and how it's been developing over the past 4 years. Now, when Donald Trump was first elected, it was a shock. It was a shock to almost everyone. Yet he did win, and it appeared that he won legitimately, and I think he did, on the night of the election. And within hours, though, of Hillary Clinton's concession, she charged that the Trump campaign had conspired or colluded with Russians. I mean, you're familiar with the story, working with Vladimir Putin to affect the outcome, and thereby what Hillary Clinton did was cast doubt on the legitimacy of the election result. Now, there have been some assertions to this effect during the campaign when candidate Trump needled Clinton and her supporters and Democrats in general during his speech where he very famously said, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find Clinton's 30,000 emails." You remember that. It's uncertain whether Trump's remark was more unserious than the Democrats actually believing that Trump was calling on Russia to do something to help him during a public speech. The whole notion is, it's kind of an insult to your intelligence. But now we know that the entirety of the Obama administration, including Obama, Biden, Brennan, Comey, Clapper, Rice, all of them, and a whole bunch of others, were complicit in an effort to undermine Trump's campaign. That effort failed, but it didn't end the effort to undermine President-elect Trump leading up to his inauguration and even into his presidency up until the present time. Now, all throughout the period between Election Day and Inauguration Day, there were efforts that were conducted to prevent the electors, the people who actually elect the president, from casting their vote in the Electoral College for Trump, as they were supposed to do if that's what their state laws actually said that they must do. We saw all kinds of efforts to try to stifle that. Now, consider what the implications would have been had there been enough electors who would have defied the law and changed their vote and denied Donald Trump the 270 votes he needed to become president. This would have been a coup d'etat. They would have defeated the Constitution, which prescribes exactly how a president gets elected, and that would have been a total disaster for the country. Now, of course, it didn't end, the Democrats' efforts didn't end with that misguided effort. On Inauguration Day, the entire Congressional Black Caucus did not attend the inauguration, claiming that Trump was not legitimately elected. Okay? And then during the first 100 days of Trump's presidency, the largest mainstream news media outlets, all the alphabet soup of news organizations, the New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, all of them had an unprecedented 90 to 95% negative stories regarding President Trump and his new administration. Now, you contrast that with the way they treated Obama. People noticed this 180-degree turn from this glowing praise of Obama to this glowing hatred, white-hot hatred of Trump. It was just obvious that the media chose a side, and it wasn't Trump. Now, media shouldn't be on anybody's side. Let's get that straight. But they were clearly on Obama's side and then clearly not on Trump's side. And that contrast was very striking, but it wasn't totally surprising to Trump supporters. I mean, we've all known for years that the media is biased to the left. Now, there was even talk within the president's inner circle, which included people in the Department of Justice, about removing President Trump from office using the 25th Amendment. And had that been successful, that too would have been a coup d'etat. And one of those conspirators, Rod Rosenstein, still in the DOJ. Don't ask me how, but he is. He's still there. Now, at the center of all of this opposition was this, and I'll say it with air quotes, expressed belief that Trump was a Putin puppet. But he wasn't, and the people who were expressing that belief inside the intel agencies and the FBI knew he wasn't a Putin puppet. The entirety of the media, news, entertainment, sports, all hammered the same theme that Donald Trump was not a legitimate president because he colluded with Russia to affect the outcome. The premise that Trump's election in 2016 was illegitimate has now been shattered into 1,000 pieces with the revelation based on John Brennan, the CIA director under Obama, John Brennan's handwritten notes that it was actually a plot by Hillary Clinton that Barack Obama was aware of and sanctioned. This whole notion of Russian collusion on the part of Trump. Now, this is sedition, clearly sedition, and it's bordering on high treason. It doesn't get more serious than that. So, we hear all this talk about, peaceful transition of power. There was no peaceful transition of power back in 2016. Let's get that straight from the jump. Now, the Democrats who impeached Trump and who were on the House Intelligence Committee were also aware of this big lie. That means Adam Schiff was aware of it, and no doubt Nancy Pelosi was aware of it. And they still went forward with impeachment. Think about that. But interestingly, they didn't go forward with an impeachment with respect to collusion. Right? You remember that? They went because of the phone call with the Ukrainian president and obstructing justice. Remember all that? That they didn't go with what they had been screaming about for the previous 2.5 years. Now, why did they do that? Now, that was really done that way for two very important reasons. I mean, the first reason was that there was no evidence at all that Donald Trump had colluded with the Russians. And the second reason is that they knew if they did try to impeach Trump on that collusion issue or non-issue, that they would have had to reveal that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama really created that, and it was not actually the case. So they were doing it to protect Clinton and Obama. And then they tried to throw Trump out in a different way. And of course, it didn't work. Now, President Trump wasn't in office for 2 weeks in 2017 when the Washington Post reported that Obama's old campaign organization, Obama for America, or OFA, renamed itself Organizing for America, or OFA, and began coaching people in the federal agencies to resist policy changes coming down from the new president. Now, this too is an illegal act. You're not supposed to do that. A new president comes in. The old president doesn't tell the bureaucracy, don't follow what this guy tells you. That's sedition. Now, it should go without saying that the president is the head of the executive branch of government, and everyone working in those federal agencies are duty-bound to enact the policies that are authorized by the president. There's no resistance that isn't insubordination or, in extreme cases, sedition. Now, this action by OFA was unprecedented, extreme, and illegal. Nothing ever happened. Now, President Trump is being undermined from all directions inside the government, federal agencies ostensibly that are under his control, Congress and the judiciary, all acting in opposition to him. And it's important to remember that all of this is based on a lie. The lie that President Trump and his campaign colluded with Russia's Putin, and that collusion continued into his presidency. None of it is true. Not one bit of it. But still, a large portion of our country bit down hard and believed it. They still believe it, even now, despite irrefutable evidence to the contrary. And part of the reason for that is that news organizations aren't reporting it, or they're dismissing it if they do report it. But it's irrefutable. Now, as we're in the middle of I'd call it a pretty bitter election campaign. We have now social media outlets like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and others silencing conservative voices in support of President Trump. This broad spectrum of mass media has now been leveraged against this president. But if that wasn't enough, Democrats in Congress and in states and cities around the country are poisoning the electoral process in other ways with a dramatic expansion of unsolicited mail-in ballots. Early in Trump's presidency, people probably don't remember this, but he sought to have the voter rolls in every state scrubbed and updated. Politicians on both sides of the aisle, it wasn't just Democrats, politicians on both sides of the aisle, balked at this idea, and it was never carried out. Voter rolls, if you don't understand how they work, they have been neglected and contain enormous amounts of stale information. Let me just give you an example. If a voter moves or changes their name due to marriage, like a lot of women do, or someone dies, there's no process in place that automatically updates the rolls of registered voters to reflect that fact. It requires the state or county board of elections to make those updates, which many states leave up to voters themselves to notify the board of elections. And as far as I know, nobody who's died never went back and told the board of elections to take their name off the list. I can use myself as an example here. When I moved out of New York State, I found myself, it's 8 years now, I'm still registered in New York to vote. And I had to fill out a form, which I did just last week, to strike my name from the voter rolls. I mean, otherwise somebody could have voted in what I did not find out is when was the last time they actually had me voting in New York. That would have been interesting. But anyway, it did not happen. So, I think the point is, though, is that voter rolls that are being used to send out mail-in ballots is pretty sketchy. It's not a good idea. The mass mailing of unsolicited ballots is going to undoubtedly result in a new high in voter fraud. It's going to lead, it is leading inevitably to the fact that no supporter of Donald Trump is going to believe an election result because of stuff like this if Trump loses. I mean, that's the problem we have here. I mean, the point I guess I'm making is that the Democrats have spent Trump's entire first term in office trying to kick him out of office and using any device at their disposal, legitimately or not. I mean, the impeachment of President Trump wasn't legitimate. The attempt to change the electoral votes wasn't legitimate. The attempt to use the 25th Amendment to throw President Trump out of office wasn't legitimate. What gives people any comfort in this country at all that the changing of the rules of how mail-in ballots work is legitimate either? And if the result of the election is that Donald Trump loses because of that, why would anybody believe the result is legitimate? It makes no sense. So the Democrats have poisoned with fraudulent votes this process, and now they expect 65 million Americans who are probably going to vote for President Trump to just go along with it and respect a peaceful transition of power? Really? What makes Democrats think the transition will be peaceful now that they plan to steal the election? We didn't have a peaceful transition of power in 2016 when the election was fair. Now that the Democrats plan to steal the election, they believe this transition is going to remain peaceful? What makes them think that? It will not be peaceful. And I'll tell you something else. If the Democrats actually steal it, it shouldn't be peaceful. I know that's controversial. Sorry, but you don't get to steal a presidential election, Democrats, without a fight. And I mean, really a fight. The tragedy for this country right now is that Democrats have painted the whole country into a corner where we're in a no-win situation. It's a catch-22. There can be, because of the Democrats, no fair outcome in this election that does not result in a Trump victory, because the actions of the Democrats over the past 4 years informs us that we cannot, nor should we, believe any other result. This is the fault of no one but the Democratic Party and their allies in the media, who gave up on being impartial journalists and no longer act as the fourth estate, but rather act more like a fifth column. The Democrats, in other words, just to sum this up in one actual sentence, the Democrats, as they did in 1860, have finally gone too far. And that's it. Thanks for listening.